Today we have with us Joshua Milligan. Joshua, I'm going to leave you to introduce yourself other than to say you're a Zen Master, an author, a teacher of all things Tableau, and Technion is your employer. Those are the things I remember off the top of my head without having a sheet in front of me. So I'll have to go to there. Oh, there we go. 2017 Iron Viz Global Finalist. Passions include training, mentoring, and helping people gain insights and make decisions based on their data through data visualization using Tableau and Tableau Prep. Principal consultant at Technion Data Solutions, where he served numerous clients in the industry since 2004. The author of Learning Tableau and a much quoted site for me, vizpater.com is his website. Highly suggest checking that out and following Joshua on Twitter. With no further ado, Joshua, you want to go ahead and take your share and start up? Thanks again for coming today.
All right, thank you so much, and thank you for that introduction. That was perfect. So I won't go through my introduction very much, but I will show the ways that you might reach out to me if you'd like to, as well as on the forums. That's a great place. I love to hang out there, and so definitely reach out. I'd love to make connections with you. So as Patrick mentioned, I am a consultant at Technion Data Solutions. I've been there almost 15 years now, and it's been a great place to work with clients, to learn and grow myself, and especially I love it because I get to use Tableau almost every day as I work with clients. So definitely feel free to reach out to Technion as well. You'll notice there Eric Stevens, our Tableau Partner Development Manager. That's a new position, and so I'm excited to work with him. I am a Tableau Zen Master, as Patrick mentioned. I've been one 4 times now, which is an incredible honor and very humbling too when I see the other Zen Masters and what they're doing. But it's a lot of fun to work with them just in the community, helping people and learning lots of things from them as well. I do blog and I am an author, but one of the greatest joys in my life is the fact that I am a father 4 times now as well. So maybe I'll be Zen Master as many times as I have children. I wonder if there's a correlation there. But I don't know. We may be done. 4 is a lot to handle, but it's a lot of fun too. And so my wife and I are enjoying that aspect of life very much. State of the Unions. This is the second State of the Unions address, and so we're going to take a look at all things unions. Some of you may want a refresher on unions. What are they? How do they work? How do you create them? We'll take a look at that. And then 2016 was the last State of the Unions address. Unions was a new feature in Tableau Desktop, but there are some new things that have been introduced since then, so we'll take a look at that. And then Tableau Prep. That's a huge leap in terms of what can be done with unions. So we'll take some time to look at Prep as well, and that'll be a lot of fun. We'll see lots of different ways to create unions. We'll see some great uses of them. I'll throw in some cool tips and tricks along the way, and that'll be a lot of fun. And then I'll try to reserve some time for some Q&A at the end, but there should be a chat window that you can type your questions in as we go, and that way we don't forget, and we'll come back to them towards the end of the hour. And the State of the Unions is strong. Yeah, unions are a powerful feature. They were powerful when they were first introduced, and they have only gotten more powerful. There's a lot that you can do with them to shape your data and to bring data together that would have been rather difficult otherwise. So unions are incredible. We're going to take a look at all the different ways that you might create them, and many of the different ways you might use them. But first, some of you might be saying, I've heard of unions. What are they exactly? Well, the idea of a union is actually fairly simple. The idea is that I have multiple tables of data, and the data often is very similar in structure between these tables. It doesn't have to be exact, and we'll take a look at that. And these might be different tables in a database. They might be different files. We'll talk about the different options there as well. But the idea is that I have all of these different tables and I want to bring them together into a single table. But I don't want to join them where I'm going to match rows with other rows of data. I just want to concatenate them together. I just want to create one big table that takes all of those rows and just stacks them on top of each other. And you'll notice that that we'll get the exact same columns that that existed in those original tables, but sometimes we'll see some extra data that Tableau or Tableau Prep will bring in some metadata that can be very helpful, and we'll take a look at that as well. So that's the concept of a union. Let's take a look at what that would actually look like in action. So here's Tableau Desktop, and I'm going to introduce just a single file here. One of my favorite set of movies of all time, Star Wars, and this is very similar to what we just saw, where here I have an Excel file and I've got three different tabs. I've got data for the prequels, I've got data for the originals, and data for the sequels. So so we'll take a look at how we might bring all of these data together. And you'll notice different tabs here. We'll see how that works in Tableau. So I'm going to grab that file and just drag and drop onto Desktop, which will start a connection. But since there are multiple tabs, Tableau is going to let me decide how I might want to use this data. And so I've got a couple of different options for creating a union. One possibility is to just start dragging tables out here. And notice when I drag, I'll get the preview, and then I can go to my next table. And instead of dropping out here where it's going to create a join, which I don't want, notice how that will give me just multiple rows. But here, what I want to do is create a union instead. So I'm going to take that prequels table and drag it right to the drop area for a union. Now you'll see it's adding rows to my table. Now we'll talk about this in a little bit, but you'll see that that in cases where the columns matched in the name and the type, it matches just fine. But in cases where the column names might be different, so here job and here occupation, I'm going to have an issue that I'm going to have to fix, because Tableau does not automatically match those up because it has no way of knowing that those are the same. Income matched, the light side or dark side preference matched, and then Tableau adds in a couple of fields here to let me know which Excel file it came from, and then which sheet within that Excel file. Here it's just a single one, so these will be the same. But that'll be useful later on. And then sequels, I can bring that in as well and drag and drop that one, and notice it just adds the rows. So really easy to create a union. And then occasionally you'll hit some issues like this where I see two columns that need to be brought together. So if I just control click to select both, then Tableau makes it very easy to merge those fields together. And notice that it did that by concatenating the names, but now all of those rows work out just fine. And then I can rename this to maybe a simpler label. And now I've got something that I can work with. I can work with this data set very easily, and I can start to see, between the different movies or trilogies, which one had the highest income for the different characters. Well, in order to do that, actually, I'm going to either use the sheet or table. So notice that the sheet gives me that data, and it actually makes it very easy then to rename that field as something that that makes more sense to me, and I can use that in a calculation. I can do all kinds of things with that metadata that Tableau has added. So that's a very useful way of working with it. So this was a very simple union, just something to kind of get us started, and a lot of these features were there when Tableau first introduced the ability to union. So I could union files together, I could union sheets within an Excel document together, and that worked really well. But one thing that I couldn't do very easily was union within a database. Well, there were ways to do it, and we'll talk about how you might have done it before, but Tableau has made it even easier now. So here I'm looking at a SQL Server database. I've got 5 different files, or 5 different tables in this database. And what I've got is 3 that I'm really interested in. I've got 3 different airlines, all broken up into different files. And what this is just the ticket purchase and travel information for my employees who happen to fly on that particular airline. So here's American. You can see different purchases of tickets. Obviously, fake data. I wish that the ticket prices were that low now, but sadly, that's a hard deal to find. But all of these are very similar in structure, very similar in data types. We'll see if there are any discrepancies. We'll see those issues emerge. But my thought is that if I want to work with all 3 of these airlines together, I'm going to have to bring that data together in some way, and the best way is going to be to union them together. Now, once again, I can drag and drop here to start to union together, and this is a relatively new feature in Tableau, where I can actually just drag and drop tables within a database to create unions. And so now if I update, you'll see I get all the rows. And again, Tableau introduces table name as a field here, which is going to be very useful, because if I want to identify which airline the data came from, that is going to be my only indication. There was no column in the field that in the table that identified the airline. The table name itself is what identifies that airline. So that's one way of creating a union. I'm going to remove that for now, and let's talk about a couple of other possibilities. Well, one way that has always been there is the idea of writing a custom SQL. So I can write my own custom SQL to just select from the tables, and at that point I could just write part of the SQL statement to union that to another table here, and that works really well as long as all of the fields match exactly. So that's going to be the trick with a custom SQL, is that the SQL engine is going to require the same name, same type, and same order of all the columns, whereas dragging and dropping did not require that, because Tableau is going to keep track of fields that are mismatched and allow you to merge them together like we saw before. But here I'm going to have to be very precise and potentially come in and do some crazy SQL code to get things to match and line up if they don't by default. Also notice that I don't get an indication of the table name from my custom SQL unless I specifically build that in. So I could potentially add that, something like that, and then I have to make sure it matches. Notice if it doesn't match, SQL is going to complain. But if it does match, then I should be able to see that. And now now notice I do get to see the airline. So, so I can build that in, but again, this is a little bit going to be a little bit more tedious and manual to create a union this way, but it's nice to know that you have that as an option. One other possibility is that I can just drag and drop a new union here. So this existed with the Excel file. This existed with we'll see it with text files as well. But I can drag and drop a new union here, and this allows me to build a union either by dragging and dropping tables. So I can do that just by dropping them in there, or one really nice thing is this wildcard match, because sometimes in your database you'll have a naming convention like we have here, where you'll have a lot of tables that are all related and you'd like to union them all together, and then you have other tables that don't match that naming convention that you want to not include. So here, if I were to say airline star, then this union will include all of those different airlines, and I can come into this database and I can start to look at things like the maybe the ticket type per airline, which is now called table name. So again, I might need to clean this one up. So notice table name here is airline underscore and then the actual airline name. So that that wouldn't be too hard to clean up with a calculation. So I can use these metadata fields that have been created, and I can create calculations that will clean them up. So here I'm going to create one called airline, and what we'll do is we'll just replace within the string, we'll just replace that airline underscore with nothing. And I can bring airline out there and just double check that now I've got a nicely cleaned up name for the airline, and I can get rid of table name. I can even, once I've used it and no longer need it, I can even hide that field so it no longer shows up, and I can keep my, my data source nice and clean. But now I've got something that I can really start to work with, and I can look at total ticket prices, I can look at average ticket prices, and do all kinds of analysis on this sort of thing. I can look at routes. But then after I've built this out, then I'm told that, oh yes, our database has 3 airlines, American, Delta, and United, but there's another airline, Southwest, that uses a completely different system for tracking travel, and that results in a file that gets dropped out into a directory, and not just one file. It turns out that we get a new file periodically, so maybe every month, or in this case every year, we get a new file that's dropped out there. And so so how am I going to work with this data? Well, once again, these files are all going to be relatively the same in terms of their structure. So if I were to look at these, here they're CSVs, so a little bit harder to read, but they all have purchase dates and travel dates and passenger IDs and that sort of thing. And that's going to work really well to union these together. So I come back to my data source, and I think, okay, I need to bring in these text files, these CSV files, and I'll start with 1 because that should allow me to union them together. And Tableau has automatically created a join. Well, that's not at all what I want. I don't want to join. I just want to union this back in. So I'm going to remove that, and I'm going to come to my file and drag, and then all of a sudden I realize I don't get that union drop zone because Tableau will not allow me to union together tables or files of different data source types. So SQL Server here, a text file here. I cannot union those together with a simple drag and drop. I can join them, so cross database join, but again, that's not the way I want to do it. And if I took this file and just dropped it onto the union, it's just going to replace it. And here I can take multiple files and create the union, or I could create a new union. I'll drop that on the top, and notice I can do it manually, or even the wildcard match within folders, subfolders, parent directories even. So lots of options with files for creating that union. But getting a union of SQL Server and files, that's a little bit more difficult in Tableau Desktop. Difficult, but not impossible. So how might we approach this kind of an issue? Well, I can leverage the ability to use a cross-database join in order to simulate a union. And here's how you might approach that. First thing I need is a data source that gives me as many rows as I'm going to have data sources of unions. So in this case, I'm going to need 2 rows because I need to join the SQL Server together with the files. Both of those will be unions too, and we'll take a look at that. But I need something that differentiates the 2 rows, so I'll start with 1 as ID, and then a nice description would be useful. So maybe a data source, and then I'll create a union here. And by the way, you could do this in Excel. You could do this many other different ways, but I'm choosing to use a custom SQL just so I can shape the data as I want. So I've got SQL Server and I've got files. I'll double check that. And this is exactly what I want. I want 2 rows of data so that I can join the SQL Server data, and that will be the top part of my table that joined to that row. And then I can join the files, and when that joins in, I'll get another set of rows beneath that first set, and so that will be effectively the same as a union, but using the cross-database join instead. Because here, and I'll call this join helper, just to remind myself why I've got it. Here, now I can create my union of SQL files, do the wildcard, and anything here that starts with an A. We'll keep it as part of the union. And I'm going to join where that ID equals 1. So I'll use a join calculation and just hard code it to 1. And I'll say, let's take a look at that. So now I get all of the rows from all of the different airline tables already union together, and so that's one set of data. And notice that my data source here is SQL Server, and I might even call this my SQL Server union, just to keep it straight. Now I'm going to switch over to my text files and create a new union here that brings in all of these text files. I'm going to switch it to a wildcard union. I'll just leave it blank. That will give me all of the files in this directory. No, actually, I won't. No, that's fine. I will. There are other files, but they're not text files, so that won't be a problem. So then that way when 2018 comes in and 2019 later next year, those will also be included in the union. I'll say OK. Now I'm going to have to adjust this join. It found a common field, but that's not the one I want. Instead, I want to go back to my join helper, and in this case, join where that ID is 2. So I'll create a join calculation, and we'll say 2. I'll say OK. And if I were to update now, oh, now I don't get anything. It's being a little bit difficult on me. But I'll call this file use union. Let's try one last time. No, it doesn't want to work with me. But that's not that big of a deal. We will we'll come in and look at this. But you will notice that what it did do when I simulated the union instead of creating it by drag and drop, it did actually give me multiple columns. So in this case, two columns for each type of or each data set. So For example, the travel date. It comes in for the files, and it also comes in over here on the SQL Server side. So it didn't see those as the same field because they're not. They're two totally different fields. The other thing that I don't have the option here in Tableau Desktop is I don't have the option to select both and merge them together, because that merge feature is specific for a union. And so here, since I'm just simulating the union, I don't get that as an option. But that's not a huge problem. We can clean that up here in Tableau. I'm going to just going to double check and make sure we got what we expected. So here's my data source. No, we've got something going on. Edit my data source. Let's make sure. Oh, here we go. I'm going to switch to left joins just to make sure that everything comes through. Update. There we go. It wasn't being difficult. I simply didn't set up my join correctly. Yeah, so you'll notice now it's really easy to see that everything that came through on the from the files is present for that set of data, whereas it's null over here. And then if I had the ability to scroll down past 1,000 rows, I would see the reverse once I got to the second section of data. All right, now if I come back, I've got my data source files, SQL Server. If I were to look at what's going on there, I could look at that airline calculation that I created, and that worked great for SQL Server. It's still looking at the table name and getting the correct airline, but from the files I didn't have a table name. So if I come in here and edit the calculation, what I can do here is just say, you know what, if it's null, that means that it came from the files and it's Southwest. So now I've got my airlines set up correctly. And then what do I do about the fact that in some cases, I've got, for example, route. I've got routes that, that work here from SQL Server, but it's null for the files. I'm going to take airline out just for a second. But vice versa, if I have the route field here from the files, it's the exact opposite. I get a value for the files, but I don't get a value for the SQL Server. So I want to be able to merge these fields together, but I can't do it automatically because this was not a true union. So I don't have the option to merge the fields together. So instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do it in a calculation. So I can create a calculated field that is, I'll call it flight route, since I have to give it a different name from anything that's existing. And I'll just check that if one of those fields is null, then we'll just grab the value of the other. So if null, if it's not null, it'll take the first value. If it is null, it'll take the second value. Then I'll say OK. And if I check flight route, now I get a value for everything. So that worked out really well. And at that point, I can get rid of these two other route fields. I don't need to see them. I don't even need them in my data source at all. So I can hide them so that I'm not tempted to use them incorrectly. And then I can go through and I can clean up the rest of the data in the same way, creating calculated fields to merge together, and then hiding and cleaning up. And I don't need to see the join helper field at all. The data source might be helpful, but at some point I can even get rid of that. And at the end, I'm going to have a nice data source that that works well for all of the airlines and all of the data that I want. It's going to take a little bit of effort to get there, but it's nice to know that even when I have multiple tables, multiple files, and I want to bring it all together, Tableau Desktop lets me do that. But Tableau said, yes, you can do it in Tableau Desktop. Yes, it is a little bit tedious. So let's bring out a tool that really helps and really makes it easy. Let's bring out Tableau Prep. So here is Tableau Prep. And I am going to do the same basic thing that I just did, but show you how you leverage unions in Tableau Prep. We'll connect first to SQL Server and get the airline data there. So in my organization, as well as most others, the server name is always something really long and hard to remember. And Tableau Prep brings up a connection pane that looks very similar to the Tableau Desktop pane. But as I start to work with it, I'm going to realize there is a lot more to Tableau Prep in terms of creating a data connection, because here I'm creating an actual flow. So I'm going to start with my my source tables, just like I might have before, and I bring in the tables. It's going to read them and show me the fields, the values, and I can bring in multiple tables. Notice that that when I hover over, I do get an option for join and union, so I do get the similar drop zones as in Tableau Desktop. But when I do that, it's actually going to show that that's flowing together into a union, and it's going to give me the ability to union together more and more tables all at once. So here I've brought together 3 tables into a union. And Tableau Prep gives me some visual information to show me all of my different inputs. And then it shows me each field, and it color codes them based on the input to show me which inputs did it come from. In this case, all of the fields match up perfectly. So I don't have any mismatched fields listed over here. And if I scroll through, every field is color coded with all 3 inputs, and that works out really well. And then my resulting data, I can see that that worked out. I also get the table names listed here, and it's a little bit different than how Tableau Desktop demonstrated it. It gives me a little bit more information, like the server name and the database, but ultimately it still gives me that table as well, and that will work out really well. Then I think, well, I need to bring in the Southwest data. So I'm going to add a connection and grab the data from, nope, it was not Excel, it was a text file. So we'll get it from a text file. Here are the CSVs. And I'll start with one of them, which it automatically brings out. And here, what I'll do is I will look for this multiple files option, because that allows me to wildcard union these files together. I get a similar kind of option here for matching a pattern of file names, or I can just leave it blank to get all of them. So I'm going to get all of my different files here, Southwest for each year. And now I've got a nice union of data. In fact, I'm going to change the name of this input just to remind myself that that is a union of all of the data. And now, no crazy union helper or custom SQL. Now it's really easy. Just drag and drop and add it into that union. Now in this case, I do notice that there were some differences between the file and the structure that was present in SQL Server. So Tableau Prep shows me what matched and what didn't match. So row ID came from the 3 SQL Server tables, but not from the file. And I can see that both here and here, and so then I can decide what I need to do with that. Ticket type is very similar, but it suggests that I've got a couple of fields that might possibly be the matches. So ticket type and fare type. I'm going to double check. If I look at ticket type here, we've got things like first class, business economy. Fare type is very similar to that. So Tableau Prep makes it easy to select both and merge those fields together. So now it disappears from my mismatched fields. I do have some here like purchased. Now these are dates, and I think I've also got a purchased date. And now purchase date is coming from all, It's coming from all the tables as well as the files. But I do have purchased, and I have a lot of nulls. It's only coming from the files. So I do need to kind of figure out what's going on here. One thing that might be kind of interesting is to highlight the null values and notice that purchased is null in every file except for 2014. And if I look at purchase date, where is that null? Well, that's null only in 2014. So apparently the name switched. And I could fix it here, or if I want to be just maybe a little bit cleaner, I'm going to insert a step right after the file union just to look at the files themselves. And I'll notice that purchased and purchase date show up here. And I'm going to merge those two together because they came from different files. So one is null for 2014, the other has values. But if I were to come to 2015, I'm going to see the values swap and the nulls are now in the purchased. So I'll merge those fields to solve that problem. Come back to my union, and now purchased and purchase date are very clearly the same field, just one coming from files, one coming from SQL Server. So I'll merge those as well, and I can do it right here. These other fields look like maybe I don't have any options. Ticket ID may be the same as row ID. I don't know, but I won't worry about that at this point. So now I've got my data set fairly cleaned up. There may be some other things that I need to do, like first class came in differently between the two different data sources, so I can group those together. There may be some other things that Tableau Prep is going to make really easy to clean up. I also need to get the airline listed, so I can use the table names here just because it's very easy. I could write a calculation like I did in Desktop, but I could also just come in here and just type and group these together. So anywhere that it's Delta or American, Southwest, we'll just take out the word Union there. And now I have my airlines indicated. I'll change the name of the field. And now I've got a really nice way of identifying the airline. And look at the output here, and this will work out really well. Here's the fields that I don't necessarily need, but we won't worry about that. I'm going to bring that into a CSV. I do have options for Hyper or even an old school TDE. I could publish it to Tableau Server, but I'm just going to do a CSV, and we'll browse to the correct directory here. There's an employee travel already there, which we'll replace and run the flow and replace it. And we're done. So then we come back to Tableau Desktop, and we'll just bring that new employee travel file in and take a look at it. Here it is, a very nice, simple connection to a CSV, but everything has been brought together with Tableau Prep, and I can start to work with it just like I would have before. So I can look at airlines, I can look at ticket types, I could start to do my analysis on the price, I could look at travel insurance even. So lots of different possibilities now. Because I was able to clean that data up and bring it all together using Tableau Prep. And Tableau Prep made those unions very easy, even across different data sources. Now, one final thing that I'll leave with is an unorthodox approach to using unions. So Tableau now allows me to create extracts with multiple tables. And that actually makes what I'm about to show a little bit less useful for the newer versions of Tableau. But if you're using an older version of Tableau, and you've ever thought about using user security So you have a security table that tells you who has access to what, and you want to create a data source that joins those together, so that when I log in, I only see the data where the joins matched. But you also want to create an extract. Well, that could be really problematic because you might have hundreds of users. You might have data sources with millions of records. And then when you join those together, you end up multiplying that out hundreds times millions, and you get hundreds of millions or billions of records, and it just becomes unmanageable. Now, the multiple tables option for an extract is going to allow you to extract each of those individually, and you won't run into that issue near as much. But in older versions of Tableau, you'll think, well, we're just stuck. There's no way to deal with that. Well, turns out you can by using a union instead of a join. So imagine that you have your security table. So you've got a list of logins and you've got a list of departments. Well, I don't even have department here, so let's go back to Tableau Prep, and I'm going to bring in an employee table that allows me to see the department. So here I've got for each passenger, I've got their email, their department, and so I can bring that in. In this case, I will join to join that union to join the passengers together, and I'm going to keep all the passengers here. There were some additional passengers in that table that I'm not going to worry about. I'll remove that, and we'll add that here. So now if I run the output, run and take a look at it again here in Tableau Desktop, I'll refresh. Now I do have something like department, so I can look at department and ticket type. But some of my users only have access to see certain departments, finance or IT or operations, and so when they log in, that's all I want them to see. So here's what I'm going to do with the data source. I'm going to bring in that security table, and instead of joining, if I were to join that on department, I'm going to run into some issues even now. But I'm also going to end up with a lot more rows of data than I really want to deal with, especially if these data sources were large. So instead, what I'll do is I will create a union. So I'll union that together. And if I look at the results, I see every field was a mismatch, which is fine. I'm going to live with that. In fact, I'm going to use that. So when I'm looking at my security table, almost everything's null except for just a couple of fields that tell me a login and which departments those people have access to. When I look at everything else, I'm going to see all of my flight information, and that's fine. What I am going to do is I'm going to give myself a little bit of detail about the data source. So I'm going to repurpose this field. Oh, it doesn't like that because I already have one. So we'll call this data source. Oh, it doesn't want to redo it there. Let's add a step. So it didn't like doing it in the union because the union was actually creating that table. So here's my security. Here is my flight data. And now we'll go to the output, and I'll run it again. And when I refresh here, you'll notice that I get some additional null fields, but that's from that security data. If I were to look at my my data source, the security data comes in null, and that's to be expected. What I want to do is I want to create a calculated field now, and I'm going to leverage some level of detail calculations to determine who is logged in, and based on who is logged in, what do they have access to. So I'm going to create a department access field, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to look across the entire data set to find those last few rows of data that contain my access. And I'm going to say if the login field happens to match the logged in user. So I could use this username field or a username function. That's probably what I would do in a real life situation. Here I'm just going to hard code it to say this guy S. Larison, and we'll double check. But if I look at the security table, what I expect is that he should see only finance. So if the login is S. Larison, then we'll grab the list of departments that he should have access to. Oops, guess I should match my. So that's my list of departments that he should have access to. And we'll close that off. And now, we'll end it. Now I have brought this to every row of data in the table. So even the flight data now contains the list of departments that S. Larison has access to. Notice that if I bring that out here, it is always finance. So the last check is, does the department match that list? So does the department itself match the list of departments? And in fact, what I probably really want to do is just do a contains. Does that list contain the department? Then I'll say OK. And if I were to keep only where that's true, then I should, oh, I should not see that. I should see something. If the departments contain, no, if the, well, let's double check. So department access, that's what I meant. So if my department access string, that's the one that contains a value for every row, if that contains the actual department, that should work. Yes, true for finance, false for everything else. And now we filter and say true. Now S. Larison only sees finance. And if I want to double check another individual, M. Boys should see IT and finance. So we'll double check that. We'll come in here and edit the calculation. And apply finance and IT only. Now, a couple of cautions. I would use this only in a pinch, and I would definitely make this a data source filter and publish it, and make sure that that I restrict access in other ways to make sure that it's as secure as I hope it is. Also, the final calculation here, you'd want to double check that you're not getting false matches because the department IT happens to be a substring of another department name. So lots of warnings around this kind of use, but it demonstrates a possible use of unions that falls outside of the normal use and gives you some options to think about for this and other issues that you may run into. With that, I think we'll go to any questions if there are any. So I am opening up my chat window now. All right. Okay, so yes, so there are some good questions here. So there was a question about after joining sheets, then not being able to pivot. So that is one thing that you'll find in Tableau Desktop is that once you have done a join, you won't be able to further manipulate the data with things like pivots. So a little bit of a different paradigm here than it would be in Tableau Prep. So Tableau Prep, you're building out a flow and you can join, pivot, union. You can do all of those things in any order and you're working through it. Tableau Desktop, as you build out a connection, is much more of a all at once kind of thing, at least conceptually. Behind the scenes, there is an order to it, but as you're joining and doing things, it is, you're not defining the order that it does it. And so yeah, you'll notice some things like that where you're not able to pivot after doing a join. And that's where Tableau Prep can be very useful. All right, so one of the challenges of chatting in or typing it in at the time is that I lose the context. So there's a question here, would you please show again how you get the union window? From Yasaman. If you could give me just the context of where that was that Tableau Desktop? I'll come back to that one. There's a question here about struggling with Tableau Prep. So yeah, Tableau Prep is an incredible tool, and but it is a different paradigm than Tableau Desktop. So there are some great help files and tutorials on the Tableau Desktop. We've also done a Think Data Thursday on Tableau Prep, and definitely we'll do some more. So I love it, but and once you get the paradigm, I think you'll love it too. But it is different from Tableau Desktop. And then is doing merging and calculations in prep first going to increase the performance in the workbook? Yeah, that's a great question. So when you look at Tableau Prep, there you have complete control over the order of things, and you can do calculations first and then do a union, or you can do the union and then calculations, and so often you'll think, well, is there any benefit to doing these things in different orders? And sometimes the answer is yes, but sometimes it's a little bit more complex than yes, because there are actually two different ways that Tableau Prep runs things. One is here, as I'm clicking and dragging and dropping and creating. This is kind of my design mode. And here, Tableau Prep is doing a lot of work in memory and holding things in cache. And so there could be some benefit to filtering things early or doing calculations in certain places. But then when I click the play button, it actually goes into what's called batch mode. And at that point, Tableau Prep looks at the entire flow and says, how can I collapse that into just a couple or even one efficient SQL statement to go back to the sources? Files might be a little bit different, but especially if it's using a database, it's going to compress all of everything I've done into an efficient SQL statement. So in that case, the order might not matter near as much. So definitely a great question, but something to experiment with and see if you notice any difference. But a difficult question because of the complexity of what's going on behind the scenes. Can Tableau Prep be used with SQL Server data sources that get refreshed nightly? Yes, it can. So it will refresh or it will read the refreshed data, which is great. If you're working with it here and you're not seeing data refresh for some reason, you do have a refresh button to make sure that it's reading the data sources again. So yes, it will work with that. And then some links for Tableau Prep for looking at that. Those are posted there in the chat window. All right. I'm not seeing any other questions. Definitely a lot of fun to present and to share. Patrick or anyone else on the Tableau side, any final thoughts?
No, thank you, Joshua. Thanks for presenting today. Just to make sure everyone knows, this will be online. This is being recorded, and we'll put it online onto the Think and Talk Data Tableau playlist later today. And actually, since I'm in Dublin, Ireland at the moment, it'll probably be on there to sometime tomorrow morning for everybody else in the States. But again, Joshua, thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to have you on and to share your knowledge with the community.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. It's always fun to share.
Okay. Well, thanks a lot. I think we'll wrap it up then.
Thanks.
Bye.